Sell the orchard before he's even in the ground. Her voice was calm, almost bored, like she was talking about the weather, not about me. I was 3 feet away, strapped to a hospital bed, tubes running into both arms, and my wife Carol thought I was somewhere far away in a coma, deaf to the world. She was wrong. I heard every word. "He'll want to fight it," said the second voice. "My son-in-law, Brent, 31 years old, married to my daughter for 6 years, and I'd never once trusted the way he looked at my land. Old man's stubborn. He can't fight anything," Carol said. "Doctor said if he wakes up at all, he won't be Frank anymore. Just a body." Brent laughed under his breath. "Then let's not waste time. I already talked to a broker. 60 acres of walnut trees like that, prime soil, close to the highway, we're looking at 2.4 million. Easy. Maybe more once they hear it comes with the water rights." "We'll wait for the paperwork," Carol said. "But start making calls." Neither of them saw the tears sliding down the side of my face into the pillow. They thought I couldn't hear them. They thought I couldn't understand a single word. Most of all, they thought I couldn't remember. They were wrong about all three. My name is Frank Delaney. I'm 59 years old, and until 4 days ago, I thought I had built something that would outlast me. 60 acres of walnut orchard in the Central Valley of California, land my own father had cleared by hand when I was a boy, land I had doubled and then tripled over 35 years of getting up before the sun and going to bed with dirt still under my fingernails. I wasn't born into money. My father drove a feed truck for the co-op. My mother took in sewing work from 3 different families just to keep the lights on. Everything I built one row of trees at a time. One bad harvest survived after another until the bank finally stopped calling and started asking to invest. 4 days ago, I was up on a ladder trimming the high branches on the east side of the property when the rung gave out under my boot. I don't remember the fall. I remember the ladder tilting, and then nothing. Until I woke up in a hospital bed in Fresno with a headache like a freight train and a body that would not move no matter how hard I tried to make it. The doctors told Carol I'd suffered a severe brain injury along with a fractured spine, and that even if I survived, there was a real chance I would never speak, walk, or recognize my own family again. I heard Dr. Whitfield say those words to her myself, standing just outside my door that first morning. "There's swelling we're monitoring closely," he told her. "It's too early to know how much function he'll recover. Some patients surprise us." "How early is too early?" Carol asked. "Weeks, possibly months of rehabilitation, if he responds at all." Months. That word landed on me like sunlight breaking through clouds. A chance. A real chance. I heard Carol thank him, heard her voice crack just enough to sound convincing, heard her blow her nose into a tissue. She was good. I'll give her that. 22 years of marriage, and I never once suspected she had that kind of performance in her. The second the doctor's footsteps faded down the hallway, something in her changed. I couldn't see her face, my eyes wouldn't open yet, but I could hear it in her voice, in the way the sympathy just drained out of it like water down a drain. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Lighter footsteps. Not Carol. A woman's voice, warm and steady. "Afternoon, Mr. Delaney. I'm Renata. I'll be your nurse for the day shift." She checked something near my arm, adjusted a line. "Let's see how you're doing." She went quiet for a second, then softer. "Mr. Delaney, can you hear me?" I put everything I had into opening my eyes. It felt like lifting a car off my own chest. But they opened. Just barely. Just a crack. "Oh," she breathed. She leaned in close. "You're in there. Blink once if you understand me." I blinked. Once. She went still for a moment, like she didn't quite believe it. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I'm not going to say anything to anyone yet. Not until I understand what's going on. Blink twice if that's all right with you." 2 blinks. For the first time since the fall, someone was asking me something instead of deciding it for me. Renata Cruz, 38 years old, a nurse for 15 years, and the first person in that hospital who treated the man behind my eyes like he still existed. There was a problem, though. I couldn't speak. My jaw wouldn't cooperate. My tongue felt like a stranger in my mouth. My hands lay useless at my sides. Only my eyes and, barely, my right thumb responded when I asked something of my body. Renata noticed the thumb move on the second day. She leaned over my hand. "Was that on purpose?" I moved it again. Small. deliberate. "You're trying to tell me something?" she said, and there was something like wonder in her voice. Here is where an old memory came back to me, one I hadn't thought about in years. My younger brother Walt was born with cerebral palsy, and for most of his childhood, before he passed at 19, the only way we communicated on his hardest days was through a system of finger taps. My mother invented one tap for yes, two for no, three for wait. I hadn't used it in almost 40 years, but the body remembers what the mind forgets. One tap against Renata's palm. Yes. "Do you want your family to know you're awake?" she asked. Two taps. No. She didn't ask why. She didn't hesitate. "All right," she said simply. "I'll help you figure out what you need first." That evening, Carol came in carrying a bouquet of grocery store carnations and kissed my forehead like she meant it. "I'm right here, honey," she said. Brent trailed in behind her with his phone already out, texting someone before he'd even sat down. "Broker wants photos of the property line," he muttered. "Says buyers will want to see the irrigation system." "Not yet," Carol said under her breath. "We wait for the paperwork." I wanted to laugh, except nothing in that room was funny. They had no idea the ground beneath their plan had already started to crack. Renata came in to check my monitors and never so much as glanced my way with anything but professional calm. She was already better at this than I'd expected anyone to be. After they left for the night, Renata pulled a small notebook from her scrub's pocket and wrote something, then held it up where I could see. "Is there someone I should call?" One tap. "Yes." "A name?" I couldn't write yet, my hand too weak to hold a pen, but I could tap out letters against her palm, slow and clumsy, the way you'd spell a word into a stranger's hand in the dark. It took almost 10 minutes. Margie. "Margie," Renata repeated. "Your sister?" One tap. She found the number in the emergency contact list listed second, right below Carol's. Renata stepped into the hallway, and less than a minute later, I heard a woman's voice crackle through the speaker. "This is Marguerite Delaney Voss." "Mrs. Voss, this is Renata Cruz. I'm a nurse at Valley Memorial. I'm calling about your brother, Frank." A pause. "He's awake, and he's asked for you specifically." I didn't sleep well that night, and it wasn't the pain keeping me up, though there was plenty of that. It was Carol's voice looping over and over in my skull. "Sell the orchard before he's even in the ground." And Brent's laugh right behind it. Old man stubborn. For 35 years I had worried about drought, about frost, about market prices for walnuts crashing the year my loans came due. I never once worried that the danger to everything I'd built would be sitting beside my hospital bed holding my hand. Around 9 the next morning, a woman in a green raincoat came through the door so fast it nearly hit the wall. "Margie!" 61 years old, 4 years older than me, and the only person left alive who remembered our father's calluses and our mother's sewing machine running past midnight. The second she saw my eyes open, her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Frankie." She dropped into the chair beside the bed. "They told me you might not—" She stopped herself. I came as fast as I could. I blinked twice at Renata. Renata understood immediately and quietly closed the door. "He's been communicating with taps," Renata explained. "One for yes, two for no. He asked for you by name using letters." Margie's eyes went wide, then wet. "The old tapping system. Walt's system." She took my hand carefully. "You remember that?" One tap. "Of course you do," she whispered. "You never forgot anything in your life, Frankie, sick or not." It took nearly half an hour, tap by tap, letter by letter, for me to spell out what I needed her to know. Renata wrote each letter down as I gave it, piecing the words together like a slow, aching puzzle. "Carol. Sell. Orchard. Heard them." Margie read it twice, her face going pale, then hard. "You heard her say that? With your own ears?" One tap. "And Brent's in on it?" One tap. She sat back, jaw tight in a way that reminded me exactly of our mother when a customer tried to shortchange her for a dress she'd spent a week hemming. "We need Walter Grimes," she said. "Today." Walter Grimes had been my attorney for 26 years. He'd drawn up the papers when I bought out my father's 40 acres. When I married Carol, when I put the orchard into a family trust after my first wife, Diane, passed from ovarian cancer 11 years back. He arrived that afternoon in a rumpled brown suit, carrying a briefcase that looked older than some of my trees. The moment he saw my eyes tracking him across the room, his shoulders sagged with something like relief. "Frank." He came to the bedside. My God. They told me it didn't look good. I tapped once against his hand when he offered it. Yes, I'm here. Renata explained the system quickly. 1 tap yes, 2 no, slow spelling for anything longer, and Walter's eyebrows climbed higher with every sentence. He can spell out full statements? Slowly, Renata said. It exhausts him. But yes. Walter pulled a chair close and set a legal pad on his knee. Frank, I need you to tell me exactly what you heard. Take your time. It took nearly 40 minutes. Every tap deliberate, every letter dragged out of a body that fought me the entire way. But by the end, Walter's legal pad was covered edge to edge, and his face had gone the particular shade of gray I recognized from 30 years of watching him deliver bad news to other people. Before we do anything else, he said finally, I need to know where things stand legally. Did Carol ever get added as an owner on the orchard deed? 2 taps. No. Is she a trustee on the family trust? 2 taps. He exhaled, some tension leaving his shoulders. Good. That's very good, Frank. He glanced at Margie. The orchard, the equipment, the water rights, all of it's inside the Delaney family trust, established after Diane passed. Carol has no ownership stake. She has access to the joint checking account, and that's the extent of it. Renata frowned. So she can't sell any of it? Not without forging Frank's signature or getting a court to declare him incompetent and appointing her as conservator. Walter's expression sharpened, which, given what you've just told me, may be exactly what she's planning next. My pulse spiked hard enough that the monitor beside me chirped a warning. Walter noticed and lowered his voice. If Carol petitions for conservatorship and convinces a judge you're not mentally competent, she could gain control over your medical decisions and, eventually, your finances. We need to move before she does. Emergency evaluations, a formal declaration of capacity, maybe a restraining order on the accounts. I lifted my hand as best I could and tapped twice against his palm. No. Walter blinked. No. 2 taps again, harder this time. He wants proof, Renata said quietly, watching my face. Not just an evaluation. Proof. I tapped once. Yes. Walter studied me for a long moment, then a slow, grim smile crossed his face. You want it undeniable. So there's no version of this where she gets to call it a misunderstanding. 1 tap. Yes. That evening, Carol arrived carrying a paper bag of takeout from the diner I used to love before all this, chattering about how busy she'd been handling everything while I recovered. Brent came in behind her, scrolling his phone, barely glancing up. Broker called again, he said to Carol, not bothering to lower his voice much. Wants an answer by Friday on the listing price. We'll talk later, Carol said, glancing toward Renata, who was adjusting my IV with the same calm, invisible efficiency she always had. Renata never looked my way, never gave anything away. She had become, in 3 days, the best actress I had ever met. After they left, Renata waited until the hallway went quiet, then pulled out her phone. I still have the number for the security company that services your property, she said. You had cameras installed after that break-in a few years back, didn't you? 1 tap. Yes, I can get you access to the footage if you want it. 1 tap. The next afternoon, my property manager, a quiet, capable man named Hector, who'd worked the orchard alongside me for 9 years, showed up with his phone already pulled up to the security app. A notification blinked across the screen motion detected, equipment shed, 3 days ago. Time-stamped right around when Brent had been checking the water lines. Hector angled the screen so I could see. Brent, walking through my equipment shed with a real estate photographer, gesturing at the irrigation pumps like he already owned them. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I tapped out 3 letters, slow and deliberate. L-E-T. Renata's eyebrows knit together. Let them? 1 tap. You want them to keep going, she said slowly. Keep doing exactly what they're doing. 1 tap. Because sometimes the fastest way to expose a thief is to let him believe nobody's watching the shed. By the end of that first week, everyone outside that small circle believed exactly what Carol and Brent wanted them to believe, that Frank Delaney was a shell of a man, silent and fading, with no say left in his own life. That belief became the sharpest tool I had. The doctors saw slow, uncertain progress. Carol saw a husband who would never again question a withdrawal from the joint account. Brent saw 60 acres with a heartbeat still faintly attached. Only 4 people knew the truth. Renata, Walter, Margie, and me. The following Monday, Walter came back with a second briefcase. And for the first time since the accident, something almost like energy in his step. I spent the weekend going through the trust documents in detail, he said, closing the door behind him. Frank, you built this thing like a man who didn't trust anybody, including your own wife. I mean that as a compliment. I managed something close to the ghost of a smile. Everything, the land, the equipment, the water rights, even the farmhouse sits inside the trust. Carol has zero ownership. She has the joint checking account, which is meaningful money, but compared to the trust's total value, he shook his head, it's a rounding error to her plans. Margie, sitting in the corner chair she'd basically claimed as her own by now, leaned forward. So legally, she gets nothing? Legally, unless Frank's will says otherwise, she gets exactly what he decides to give her. Walter's face turned serious. But there's something else. Someone filed paperwork yesterday with the county requesting an emergency competency hearing. My heart rate spiked on the monitor again. It names Carol as petitioner, Walter continued. She's requesting temporary conservatorship over your medical and financial affairs, citing your, quote, severe and likely permanent incapacitation. Renata's mouth fell open. It's been a week. 1 week. That's fast, Walter agreed grimly. Faster than grieving spouses usually move, in my experience. I tapped out slowly. WHO. Who's her attorney? Walter translated. He checked his notes. A firm out of Sacramento. Not one I recognize, which tells me she went looking specifically for someone who wouldn't ask her uncomfortable questions. That afternoon, Carol arrived carrying a vase of white lilies, the same flowers she'd used at her mother's funeral, the same flowers she knew because I'd told her once, years ago, that my late wife Diane had specifically not wanted at her own service. Carol had forgotten. Or maybe she'd simply stopped caring enough to remember. She kissed my forehead. I've been taking care of everything, sweetheart. The bills, the house, the orchard. You don't need to worry about a thing. Her phone buzzed. She stepped into the hallway to take the call. Renata, checking the medication cart just outside my door, drifted a few steps closer, close enough to hear without being noticed. She came back in a few minutes later, her expression tight. She was talking to someone named Deborah. Said the hearing's been moved up to next week, said Renata, hesitated, glancing at me. Said you don't understand anything happening around you anymore, so there's no reason to wait? I closed my eyes, not from surprise, from the particular ache of hearing it confirmed out loud. That evening, Walter brought in someone new, a wiry, sharp-eyed woman named Priscilla Vance, a private investigator he'd used on business disputes for over a decade. Michael speaks highly of your instincts, Mr. Delaney, she said, though of course I couldn't answer with more than a blink. I don't believe in coincidences, and neither should you. Your wife's been keeping a busy schedule this past week. She opened a thin folder. Every morning, breakfast with a real estate broker named Craig Feldon. Every afternoon, the hospital, for appearances. Every evening, dinner with your son-in-law. She flipped a page. Tuesday, they toured the property with 2 prospective buyers from a land investment group out of the Bay Area. Renata's face went hard. They toured it. While he's lying right here. Priscilla nodded and slid a photograph across the table. Carol standing in the middle of my orchard, laughing, pointing toward the equipment shed. Another showed Brent walking the buyers down a row of trees my father had planted before I was even born. My stomach turned over. They weren't waiting to see if I lived. They were already measuring the property for someone else's future. Over the following days, Priscilla's folder grew thick. Brent contacted an auction house about selling farm equipment that had belonged to my father. Carol met twice with a financial advisor she'd never used before. A moving company representative visited the farmhouse to assess a future relocation. And through all of it, no one visited me, except Renata, Margie, and Walter. Carol's visits shrank from an hour to 20 minutes, then some days to barely 5. There was one thing Carol never once asked about, my recovery, because she'd already decided in her mind there wasn't going to be one. Officially, there wasn't much progress to speak of. Unofficially, Renata had arranged something else entirely. Every evening, after visiting hours ended, she wheeled in a physical therapist named Doug, a broad, patient man who'd spent 20 years working with stroke and spinal injury patients at the VA hospital in Fresno before retiring closer to home. Heard you're a stubborn one, Doug said during our first real session, grinning like he already knew the answer. One tap, yes, good. Stubborn's what gets people walking again. The work was brutal in a way I hadn't expected. My fingers cramped after minutes. My shoulders screamed with every inch of movement. Attempting to shift my left leg felt like dragging a truck uphill with a rope made of string. More than once I wanted to quit right there on the mat. Doug never let me. You grew 60 acres of trees out of dirt and stubbornness, he'd say. This is easier than that. 2 weeks in, I could lift 3 fingers on command. My right arm answered more reliably. I managed, one afternoon, a crooked, lopsided smile that made Renata clap like I'd won a county fair ribbon. That's huge, Frank, she said, laughing through it. You have no idea. I did, though. Every small gain meant one thing clearly. Carol's window was closing while mine was opening. Then came the recording that changed everything. Priscilla arrived on a Friday evening with a small flash drive in her jacket pocket. You'll want to see this before the hearing, she said. Walter plugged it into his laptop. Security footage, this one from inside a steakhouse in downtown Fresno, a hidden angle catching a private back table. Carol, wine glass in hand, Brent across from her. Honestly, Carol said on the recording, I thought that fall would just finish him off. Would have saved everybody the paperwork. Brent laughed. Same. But hey, this works out fine either way. A third voice, likely Craig the broker, asked, what happens if he actually recovers? Carol didn't hesitate. He won't. Doctor said months of therapy at best, and even that's a maybe. We'll have this sold and be halfway through renovations before he's even sitting up on his own. The room went silent. Renata's jaw was tight. Margie had both hands pressed over her mouth. I stared at the screen and felt something inside me go still and cold and certain all at once. Every doubt I might have clung to, every excuse I might have made for her, disappeared. This wasn't fear talking. This was a choice, made calmly, over wine, and repeated more than once. Priscilla reached into her bag again. One more thing. She pressed play on a second clip, this one from inside my own farmhouse office. A camera I'd installed years back after some tools went missing from the shed. Carol, standing at my desk, believing herself completely alone. The sooner he's gone, she said quietly to no one, sliding a drawer shut, the sooner this whole mess is finally mine. No one in that hospital room moved. Walter closed the laptop slowly. Frank, he said, I believe we have everything we're ever going to need. I looked at him, then at Renata, then lifted my hand stronger now than it had been a week ago and tapped out 2 letters. N-O. Not yet. Because I hadn't come this far to win quietly. The county competency hearing was still 6 days out. I spent every one of those days in that gym with Doug, pushing further than my body wanted to go, because I had a very specific idea of exactly how I wanted this to end, and it did not involve a courtroom where I sat silent while other people decided my fate for me. By the 4th day, I could stand on my own for nearly 10 seconds. By the 5th, I could take 2 shuffling steps with a hand on the parallel bar. Doug never let up, and I never let myself quit, not with what was waiting for me on the other side of this. The morning of the hearing, held in a modest county courtroom in downtown Fresno, Carol arrived in a gray blazer, appropriately somber, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue for the benefit of the room. Her attorney, a sharp young man named Preston Okafor, laid out the case for temporary conservatorship. My severe cognitive impairment, my inability to communicate, the necessity of protecting the family's interests, while I recovered, if I recovered at all. Walter sat quietly beside an empty space at the petitioner's table, letting Preston finish his opening remarks completely before he so much as stood up. Your Honor, Walter said, rising slowly, before we proceed further, I'd like to introduce someone the court should hear from directly. Preston frowned. Mr. Delaney is, by all medical accounts, non-communicative. He was, Walter said. Things change. The side door opened. I walked through it, slowly, one careful step at a time, my cane tapping softly against the courtroom floor. Renata a few feet behind me, close enough to catch me, far enough to let the room see I was standing on my own. Carol's face lost every trace of color. Frank. The word came out barely above a whisper. Brent, seated beside her, looked like he'd seen something rise out of the ground. I made my way to the front, each step deliberate, not for effect, but because effect wasn't the point anymore, walking was. When I reached the small table set up for me, I lowered myself into the chair and looked at the judge, an older woman with sharp, patient eyes who had clearly seen a great many things in that courtroom, but perhaps not quite this. Your Honor, Walter said, my client would like to address the court directly. My voice, when it finally came, was rough and slow, like something dragged up from underground after years of disuse. But it was mine. I heard her, I said, looking at Carol. The day after my accident, I heard her tell my son-in-law to sell my orchard before I was, in her words, even in the ground. Carol's mouth opened. Frank, please, I was scared. I didn't know what. I raised one hand, the way Walter Grimes. Judge's face did not change. I raised one hand, and to my own surprise, the room actually quieted. There's more, I said. Play it. The county's projector screen lowered at the side of the courtroom. Walter nodded to the technician he'd arranged, and the steakhouse footage filled the screen, audio and all. I thought that fall would just finish him off. Then the office recording. The sooner he's gone, the sooner this whole mess is finally mine. A woman on the jury benches actually gasped out loud. Preston Okafor sat frozen, his prepared notes forgotten on the table in front of him. Brent's expression had drained entirely of its earlier confidence. Carol shot to her feet. That's illegal. That recording is lawfully installed security equipment on private property he owns, Priscilla said from the gallery, standing to be recognized. Following documented concerns about financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, the judge's expression had gone flat and hard. Mrs. Delaney, sit down. Walter placed a folder in front of the judge. Bank records showing attempted transfers from the family trust account. Forged authorization documents submitted to the county clerk's office 3 days after Mr. Delaney's accident. Real estate listing agreements signed before any competency determination had been made. Priscilla added her own folder. Phone records, property tour photographs, an auction house inquiry regarding equipment that belongs solely to Mr. Delaney's estate. 2 sheriff's deputies who'd been waiting quietly near the back of the courtroom stepped forward at a nod from the judge. One approached Brent first. Mr. Voss, we'll need you to come with us. There are questions regarding forged documents and attempted fraud that need answering downtown. Carol's composure finally shattered completely. She dropped back into her chair, hands over her face. Frank, I'm sorry. I panicked. I didn't know how we'd manage without. It wasn't panic, I said, and my voice was steadier now than it had been in weeks. Panic doesn't plan a real estate tour a week after the accident. Panic doesn't shop for buyers over wine. The judge denied the conservatorship petition on the spot and referred the recordings to the district attorney's office for review. As the deputies escorted Brent from the courtroom, he looked back at me once, and whatever was in his eyes wasn't apology. It was just anger at getting caught. Carol didn't look back at all. Outside on the courthouse steps, Renata stood beside me while I caught my breath, leaning more on the cane than I wanted to admit. You okay? She asked. I looked out at the parking lot, at Margie waving from beside her car, at Doug leaning against his truck with his arms crossed and a grin on his face like he'd personally won something too. I thought about my father clearing that first 10 acres by hand, about Diane and the trees we'd planted together the year we married, about 35 years of getting up before dawn for land that had almost slipped through my fingers while I lay there unable to lift a hand to stop it. It's not over, I said, but it's finally moving in the right direction. People sometimes think justice ends the moment the truth comes out in a courtroom. It doesn't. That morning wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of the parts that actually mattered: the recovery, the rebuilding, the slow work of figuring out who deserved to still be standing beside me. The months that followed moved quickly once the legal dust settled. Carol was charged with attempted fraud and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Brent faced additional charges for the forged trust documents. Neither was charged simply for what they'd wished for me. The law doesn't punish thoughts, only actions, and they'd left behind plenty of those. Brent lost his real estate license within 2 months once the board reviewed the recordings independently. Doug kept pushing me every single week. Another lap, he'd say, and I'd groan, and he'd grin like he already knew I'd do it anyway. By late spring, I was walking the orchard rows again on my own, cane tucked under one arm more out of habit than necessity. One afternoon, Walter came by my house. I hadn't moved back into the big farmhouse yet, staying instead in the smaller guest cottage near the front gate, carrying a letter that had arrived at his office, forwarded from a rehabilitation program. It was from Brent. Handwritten, no excuses in it, no blame passed on to Carol or on to me. Just an admission that he'd spent most of his adult life chasing things that had never belonged to him because he'd never built anything of his own to be proud of. I read it twice and didn't know what to do with it yet. Some wounds you don't have to answer right away. Carol reached out through her attorney a few months later, asking to meet. I agreed, mostly because I'd realized somewhere in that hospital bed that carrying the weight of hating her was its own kind of unpaid labor, and I was done working for free. We met at a diner outside of town, no lawyers, no cameras. She looked smaller than I remembered her. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I already have, I told her. Not for you. For me. She didn't understand at first, and I didn't try hard to explain it. Some things you only understand once you've lived through them. I sold off 20 of the 60 acres eventually, not out of bitterness, but because 60 acres alone, run by one aging man with a cane, wasn't a life, it was a sentence. I kept the original 10 my father had cleared and built the rest of my time around people instead of yield reports. Renata still comes by most Sundays. Margie moved into the guest cottage after her own place flooded that winter and never quite left. Doug still calls it his gym, even though I haven't needed formal therapy in over a year. The trust set up a new fund that spring, small grants for agricultural workers recovering from workplace injuries who couldn't afford long stretches of rehabilitation, the kind of help that wasn't there for me until Renata decided, on her own time, to make sure it was. We named the fund after her. She threatened to skip the little dedication ceremony out of embarrassment, then showed up anyway in a blue dress, hating every second of standing up front, crying anyway when I handed her the plaque. People ask me sometimes if I regret exposing Carol and Brent the way I did, in a courtroom, in front of strangers, instead of quietly settling it behind closed doors. My answer always surprises them. I don't regret it for a second. What I regret is that they gave me a reason to. The fall took my voice for a while. It took my legs, my hands, nearly everything I thought made me who I was. But it gave me something back I hadn't expected the ability to see, with total clarity, exactly who stays and who runs the moment you can't do anything for them anymore. Some people left. Some people stayed and never once had to be asked. That's the only inheritance worth measuring in the end. Not the acreage, not the number on a bank statement. The people who show up when you have nothing left to offer them but your presence. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, someone who stayed when it would have been easier to walk away, I'd be grateful to hear about them in the comments. And if you'd like more stories about resilience and the quiet strength it takes to start over, I'd be glad to have you back for the next one. Take care of the people who take care of you, and never let a hard season convince you your story's already finished.